Well, lovely to be back with you again. And tonight I'm going to talk about a really important subject. I mean, not that everything I talk about isn't important. Everything related to helping us to cope better with our mental health and to deal with life is important. And, that's really what I try and do on these webinars, is to really try and help with dealing with life circumstances. And tonight I want to talk about adverse child experiences, shortened to ACEs. And I'm pretty certain that you've heard of them. You may have even done the little test that you can do online, and you'll find that there's 10 categories, and there's 10 categories of abusive situations that you could have, 5 that are related to you personally, and 5 that are related to people in your life. Now, obviously, that's not all the things that can happen, adverse child experiences, but they are 10 categories that can give you a broad idea. But what was really interesting was back in 1997, a study was done. It was back in 1997 that two doctors embarked on a landmark study of over 17,000 individuals and asked them about childhood dysfunction and trauma and current physical, mental, and behavioral health. And this study became known as Adverse Child Experiences Study, very famous, the ACEs study. And that what they found was that when children were exposed to toxic stress, basic chronic toxic stress, so toxic stress, adverse experiences, toxic stress over a period of time, that was directly linked to increase in stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline, and then how that impacted the cardiovascular system, the immune system. Things like diabetes could lead to mental health challenges like depression, alcoholism, different types of addictions, and so on. And then there's been so much more research over the years since 1997, and a direct, there's shown over and over again a direct link between adverse child experiences and mental and physical health in adulthood. So it's a well-established fact. It's the field of psychoneurobiology. That's the field that I move in. The research that I do as well looks at, as well as the mind-brain-body connection, looks at the impact of toxic stress on how our mind, brain, and body functions. And it also looks at when we manage stress, how that can change. Okay, so adverse child experiences have opened our awareness to what the importance of recognizing that there are root causes to how we're showing up in life. So every experience has become part of you. You've heard me say that so often. And then those experiences come alive. And the more impactful those experiences, the more that we think about them, the more they take root, and the more that they become very strong parts of how we function. And if they're adverse, as in the ACEs, adverse child experiences, then they've shown a direct link to how this changes the brain, changes the cortisol, the hormone levels, the way the heart functions, the way the blood flows. Literally every system of the body becomes impacted. And over the years, various different studies have been done to show this impact. And so it's really fantastic, as I said, because it's raised awareness, and it's also really core to what we're doing in the neurocycle, which is, and what I try and teach on this podcast, in this NeuroLive, in the work that I do, is to help people to recognize that, whatever's happened to your histories, your stories, what has happened to you, it's never going to go away, but we can change, and we can find out what those adverse experiences are. We can recognize that our responses to those, the way we're showing up mentally and physically, in the case of this link between adverse child experiences and mental and physical health in adulthood, we can find that link. That the neurocycle process helps you to do that, to find that link. And once you found the root and once you found the source, that gives you the awareness and the explanation for, okay, so this is why I'm battling with this kind of health issue. This is potentially one of the reasons that's contributing to cardiovascular issues or gut issues or relationship issues or any type of addiction issues or levels of depression or, whatever, okay? And so it's really important to find them. And it's so, for many years, they weren't spoken about enough. It wasn't really considered that there was any kind of link. So it was quite revolutionary in 1997 to find this link. That 1997 was a very interesting time because it was also the time when, just in the mid-90s, is when they started work at, basically, MRI technology came to being, and that's when we could start seeing changes inside the brain. We'd had EEG before that, and we had CT scans, and so having all of these extra technologies showed that the brain was impacted and the brain did change as we going through life, as we having experiences. So essentially what the ACEs show us is that there's a very strong established link between what you've gone through, which is an experience, which becomes part of your psychoneurobiology. So with your mind, you experience the adverse experience. It becomes part of you. And if we don't deal with it, then it plays out into our life as adults. And what they found is that when you have different scores on the ACE, then that is almost predictive of the kind of chronic mental and physical challenges you'll have as an adult. So it's almost like you go and have a cholesterol test done for your blood to test cholesterol levels in your blood. The ACE's way of looking at the level of toxic stress you had as a child, and then how that is predictive of how you will function as an adult, or mentally and physically. Now, it's not a sentence of, it's not your destiny. It's not that you have to stay there. But the likelihood of it showing up in your life is very strong unless something is done about it. And it may be that you don't do anything about it till adulthood. It may be that you only just start discovering some of these things as you go to therapy as an adult, or maybe you're doing the neurocycle and you start discovering these adverse child experiences that you had. And so once you're aware of them, then you can't change what happened. It's happened. It's over. It's the past. Your history is your history. But we can get to the point where we can change how we relate to those situations. So instead of saying, okay, that happened to me, I had X and X and X and X, or if you do the AC scores and you find you got 5 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, or even 4 out of 10 is considered to be that there's going to be some major problems. The thing with that is to recognize that you may even find that, that those 10 don't even cover all the categories. You might have, there's so many other things that can happen to us in our life. There could be 30 out of 10 that you have. So we can have a lot of these things. And yes, they're going to impact us because they're experiences, they're real, they go into you. They go into the whole mind, brain, and body. They become part of you. They become your drivers. They drive your physical and mental health. But that is not the end of the story. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. As plastic as we are, which meaning that, we can change as we respond to environment, that works in both ways. It's called the plastic paradox. So it works in both directions. So yes, those chronic adverse child experiences that happen, or that happen over time chronically means they're happening over time. It could also be acute experiences, one-off experiences that are not dealt with. Those do change us because we're plastic. We do change. But we can also change that change. We can change how we relate to that change. So there's also been a lot of research on how we could mitigate and deal with those adverse child experiences. So obviously the neurocycle that I teach, that I've spent years researching, which is not a therapy technique, it's a system of how stuff gets in, how we can recognize that adverse experience, and how we can then deconstruct it down to the root, how we can come to terms and accept that situation, and how we can change how we relate to that situation, and how we can change how we want it to play out into our future. We can be empowered to do that, and that is, as we know, it's not an easy process. A lot of the work I've done is looking at, how often should you do that? How do you do that? What is the process? And it's 5 steps that you do in small chunks daily over cycles of 9 weeks. That's what it requires to change the network. So that plasticity that got it in, the same plasticity can be taken advantage of to get it out. So neuroplasticity is what's happening in the brain, and plasticity is the whole concept of everything goes into the mind, brain, and body. So the mind, brain, and body was changed by the adverse experience, producing those physical changes in the mind, brain, and body. And then those can be changed back again. Not you can't get rid of what happened, but you can change the relationship that you have with it. You can change what they look like inside of your body. And that's really important. So if we suppress the stuff, it's not going to be a positive thing. So I'm just going to go through a couple of points here that I wanted to make. So in basically, an adverse child experiences are traumatic events that children may be exposed to while growing up, and they include things like abuse, neglect, domestic violence, substance abuse, substance misuse, mental illness on the part of the caregivers or them. There's no denying the reality of the impact of adverse child experiences on mental and physical health. We all agree on that. The research is there, our experiences are there, we're discussing it, there's awareness, it's wonderful, we can do things about this. Thank goodness we're so focused on them because of the impact. In fact, research shows that around 61.5% of adults and 48% of children have been exposed to adverse childhood experiences. That's a very high percentage. And basically, having said all of this, we need to embrace the complexity of childhood and ask ourselves the question, okay, so here comes the other side of the coin. I'm not denying ACEs. I'm all about them. I'm all about adverse circumstances and us finding them and responding, recognizing that our adverse responses are normal responses to adverse circumstances. But at the same time, we have to be careful that we balance that, mitigate that with positive experiences, and not positive in terms of positive psychology. I'm not talking about swapping the good for the bad. That's not what I'm talking about at all, because that doesn't work. I'm talking about embracing, processing, and reconceptualizing. So embracing it. What is it? Facing this thing, doing the work to find out, okay, I'm showing up like this. Where is it coming from? Processing it, going through that whole process. And what happened? Where did this come from? Having that grief, having that sadness, being depressed, being anxious. When you see that you've gone through certain childhood experiences, that is very sad. Grieving would be a normal response to seeing that maybe you lost years of time because you were abused or something like that. Or you had very sad experiences, or you didn't have your parents around, or things like that. So we need to, I'm not denying that, and I'm stressing that fact. But what I also want to stress is that our society has, this happens like this. Let me put it like this. We ignore something, and maybe not intentionally ignoring something, but we don't really consider that an experience for years, it wasn't considered to be relevant if you had a childhood experience. They didn't see that link until the 90s, that there was a direct link between a child going through an adverse experience and the impact on physical and mental health, heart health, brain changes, body changes, mental health changes, etc. Okay, so we swung from kind of ignoring it to being very focused on it and doing a lot of research and that learning more and bringing in therapies to help people work on it, and that's fantastic. But sometimes we swing from one side to the next and we don't have balance. And as much as we have to focus on ACEs, in order to not get completely sucked into that negative, we need to also focus on what they call positive childhood experiences. So PCEs. So we need to acknowledge the ACEs, but we also need to acknowledge the positive childhood experiences. We need to balance the positive with the negative. Your whole psychoneurobiology, the way your brain works, the way your body works, the way your biochemistry works, the way your cells work, the way your mind drives your brain and your body, all works on balance. And so when something is negative, something that's thrown off, there's a sickness or something, that's when the balance is thrown off and your whole body throws everything at it, your immune system and everything, to try and fight that. So there's this period of hyperimmune response and that kind of thing, to go and try and fight this imbalance to restore balance. So there's a focus on the negative to restore balance. But if we don't restore the balance, we can get a hyperimmune response. So if we don't deal with stuff, then we get a constant focus on the negative, and then that can then swing in the opposite direction, where there is now what was healing initially, now there's time to allow the healing to naturally occur and to start focusing on the positive to balance that. If that doesn't come into place, then you get a hyper response in the wrong direction and you get an imbalance. And then it becomes a negative situation instead of a positive situation. So we swung a little bit on the other side, where there is so much focus on the negative childhood experiences that we getting consumed by those, and that can have a negative effect as well. So for example, there were some studies done where people that work with children and adults that have been through extreme situations, and they had a lot of training in ACEs, and this is good. We've got to have all of this. But if you're going to train someone in an ACE, what these people were saying is they got all this training and all the training on how this can make everything go wrong in your body and all the different things that can happen. And that's a lot of negative to deal with. If you don't balance that with, hey, you don't have to live in this, you have to balance, you have to mitigate this, you have to understand that you can change as much as it changed you to the negative, you can work on this and you can change it back because of the plasticity and so on. You have to balance that. You can't just throw negative at people. We hear this a lot, like I'll go to lectures or I'll go to conferences and people will throw up a bunch of slides on the screen and it's just all the negative numbers of how many people are depressed and dying and all that kind of thing. And we see this all the time. And yes, we need to know that, but we've always got to balance it, because nothing is always just negative. And our natural inclination is to lean towards balance. And to get balance, we'll focus on what's imbalance, which is the negative, and bring it back to the positive. But if we don't do that restoring of balance, we get thrown off. And I think there's been a little bit of that where we've got, through social media, through TikTok, through the access to knowledge, which is brilliant on the one hand, But it's once again, how are you managing the knowledge? If you're just reading negative stuff, if you're just immersing yourself in the negative stuff, what happens? So in terms of that study that was done with these people were getting the training in this particular situation with this organization that works with a nonprofit that works helping people that have been through negative situations. As they were getting that training, they were filling in the ACEs for themselves, and they suddenly felt so terrible about their own lives. And then they started feeling guilty about, did they take that through into their children's lives? What have they done to their children? And have they given their children ACEs? And so they started going down a very negative rabbit hole. So a fear of ACEs developed. And that fear in itself is very disruptive. And that can keep you stuck in a negative place. So there's already negativity. And then that can add another layer of negativity. So when we get new knowledge, that's good. It's good to know about psychoneurobiology. It's good to know about adverse child experiences. It's good to know that there's this way of these 10 categories that are very broad, that don't cover all the categories, but give us an indication. They're a guideline and have shown that there is this link between the mind, brain, and body. That if we don't do something about our political situation and our social situations and our socioeconomic situations, and if we don't help people and parents, the impact flows down into childhood and into all stages of life, not just children, but all stages of life, and these adverse circumstances affect us. We need to know about that, but we need to also know, okay, how do I mitigate it? What do I do to change this? How can I focus on keeping a balance? How can I, and there's many ways of doing this, and one of the most obvious ways is to, as you're learning about the negative, is to balance that with a lot of, hey, listen, that's how your brain changes in a negative direction. This can happen to your heart. But if you do this can counter that. So your cardiovascular system will take strain from the excess of cortisol and adrenaline and the various different things that can go wrong with your hormone. But if you do X, Y, and Z, if you do dialogue therapy, if you become aware of a person's feelings and help them to understand how those, and to help them to reach out and ask for help, and to be able to talk about their feelings and how those feelings are connected to what their behaviors are and how that's influencing how they look at life and how they're feeling that in their body, and enabling them to reflect on that and to think about that, where that came from, and to digest that and to go down and sort of dig a little deeper and process down to, where this is coming from. And then to say, okay, well, that happened, and I think that's what happened, and I think that's what happened, and be sad and to cry and to grieve and to go through that process of being, of experiencing that impact, and then saying, okay, well, this has happened. It's not happening now. It happened. I can't change it. It's my history. It's my story. But I can change that, because what I've done already, just by being aware and going through this process that I've just described, we have basically loosened up that network. And we for a moment loosened the hold on all of our systems in our body, our cardiovascular system, our immune system, our circulatory system, or basically the systems that drive our breathing, our gut, our GI system, all the systems, our brain, nervous system. For a moment, there's like a holding space that is created. And in that holding space, we have a chance. We could still be feeling sick and crying and all that stuff in the middle of that holding space, but the mere awareness starts changing the neurophysiology. And when we start changing up the neurophysiology, that's when we can start, we've got a space that we create. And in that space that we create, that network can be fixed to a certain extent. So we can start putting health back in, because your immune system is plastic. Your cardiovascular system, plastic. Your GI system is plastic, which means that when you eat the healthy foods, when you do the walking, when you get your sleeping right, when you, most importantly, manage your mind and work out ways of reconceptualizing and understanding that this happened and it's unacceptable and it's terrible, and saying all those sentences and those feelings and say, but what can I do about this? This has happened. How can I see this differently? What can I do differently? How can I move forward? And getting help in that process. As you do all of that work, you're also taking advantage of plasticity. The very act of awareness opened the plasticity.